Okay, so I think we met was it 7 or 8 years ago now? I think 7 years ago.
Oh man, that makes me feel old.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah, 7 years. Yeah, that sounds about right.
It's
It was
so
in Toronto,
weird.
right?
Yeah, I was in Toronto. Yeah,
Yeah.
the first event we ever did, the big one. And I remember Henrik was there and he wore a suit to the first UXR conf. And
I definitely did not wear a
I
suit.
know you didn't wear a suit. No, but I just remember like you and Henrik were like the two great like sponsors. We were so excited to have like research tools that were like interested in coming out and whatnot. And it's a big watershed moment. And now, I mean, here we are. Like you guys are grown so much, right? And now you got like what 100 people now working using
Yeah,
it or
just
something?
over 100 people. But yeah, I remember that and I remember we were like wrangling the sign up and trying to get it. Got it. That was a ton of fun, that conference. I mean, I feel like number of people I met at that conference that like were part of my life in some way over this past 7 years. Like, really high density.
It,
It was fun.
yeah, it's funny. I miss that event in a way because um, like I feel like things were just like a lot simpler back then, right? There was so much that was just we are just at the beginning time, and there's just a lot of excitement, a lot of possibility, and everybody that was there was like had somehow discovered the space on their own and was like, this is really cool. This is what I want to be doing. So everyone was just really excited about that. I guess as spaces grow, they always change naturally, but I remember that fondly.
Yeah, I agree. I think at the time too, it was like the tailwinds had begun, right? So you kind of are getting this rising tides, but it was still early enough that it was like it was all positive, and that there was a little bit less of like, hey, maybe should we do it this way or that way? There were less decisions to be made, and it was all just like people aren't doing enough research. Anything
Totally.
to make it easier. Let's go
Anything.
do this. It's all these tailwinds. So that
How
was
much how early, how many years before that did you start user interviews?
I think we started in 2016, so it must have been like 1 year before, maybe a year and a half before, depending on the
Yeah,
month.
something. Yeah, maybe it was a year and a half or whatnot.
Yeah, I think
So,
we had raised money by then. Otherwise, there's no way we were going. But I
well,
think
how
we had
did
just
how did
raised
it start like functionally? Because I know you said you were. I think you told me before you were doing something else.
yeah,
Um, and then you're like, we should have done more research. Maybe we should make it easier to do research. Is there
yeah.
something along those lines?
Yeah, I'll tell you the founding story. We took the scenic route, is what I will say. So, my co-founders Dennis, Bob, and I, we started a different business. I think it was 2013 or 2014. So almost a decade ago now, and it was basically a mobile app for hotel services. So you could order room service, et cetera, through an app on your phone. At the time we didn't do any research, right? It was just mobile's big, hotels are big. You smash it together, you get something
10 out of
super
10.
big, right? Yeah, you can't
Totally.
lose. So we kind of grinded away on that for a while. Did like a few small little like pivots. We're doing a bunch of hacks to try to get people to use us. Um, at the time, like what we did is we uploaded room service menus from like all the Starwood, Marriott's, Hilton's, Hyatt's in America just manually. And
Yeah.
then if a user ordered something, we didn't actually have relationships with these hotels. So it would just uh, basically one of us was on call at all times. It would ring our phone. We would then go call the hotel, place the order. And kind of what we found out is if you have the person's name and you have their room number, they don't like ask too many questions. So we pretended it was automated, but we were just in the back, and we didn't have that many calls, but we had enough like 3 a.m. calls like that. It was a little rough, but that. So anyway, so we were doing that, not getting the traction we wanted. We then learned about user research, and like, oh, we should talk to people who we think might be potential users to figure out why they wouldn't use an app like this. Our hack at the time was we would buy refundable JetBlue tickets, and we were in Boston. We would go into the airport in Boston, go past security, call to refund the tickets, and just accost people at the gate to give us feedback on the app. We'd be like,
I
so
love that.
yeah, so it's
That's fantastic.
very non scalable. Basically, what we found was, look, there's a core value problem here. This isn't going to get fixed by like a new feature, a new UX. So we kind of had this existential moment. And we're like, all right, well, we got to pivot. So we spent this whole summer trying to think of ideas to pivot to, initially starting within travel and getting broader and broader. And all of these ideas had a level of experimentation, but also a lot of research. So eventually we had this aha moment of like, look, we're passionate about this research. We're seeing this value of research. How do other companies do it? And everyone we talked to, first of all, said recruitment was the biggest pain point. And everyone also said, like, we should be doing more research. We should be doing more research. So we felt like there was this latent demand. Um, and then we were like, oh, maybe this is something we could, some way we could provide value. And then we tested it out, continued to do more research, and eventually decided to kind of take the leap and launch user interviews.
I feel like recruitment is one of those things where it's like a problem that's like, oh yeah, like yeah, we should solve that. This sounds pretty straightforward. You get a bunch of people, you add them to a panel, which easy. It's not that easy, is it?
Yeah, I mean, I think. Well, I would say like I think most people knew it was hard. Like I think the question was like, can you do that? Can you make it easier? Right? Like there was this kind of feeling like if I could snap my fingers and talk to people, like we knew the market was there to some extent, right? Like people were like, yes, I want to do more research. So a big question for us was like, are we able to do it at scale? With high quality, low fraud, very fast over time. Um, and that
When did you find conviction? Like, obviously, it's a bet that you could do that. Like, the whole company's a bet that you could do that. And, you start working on it. You basically raise money for it, whatever. At what point along the journey were you like, did you have the conviction, like, yep, we can solve this problem? We can really legitimately solve this problem?
um, so at the beginning, we were doing a lot of non-scalable things to fill studies, right? So it's kind of a two-sided marketplace. So what we really didn't want to do again was spend this time building a product and then have no one use it. We'd been through that. So what we were doing is we were trying to get sales functionally, and then we would go and sprint to go fill those projects. But the good thing for us was the existing infrastructure or the existing solutions were so bad that the bar was pretty low. Like most people were posting on Craigslist. That's how they were finding people. So, as long as
And
we
if you
could have
didn't do
like
the
really,
Craigslist and you actually got like boutique recruiters, they would charge you an arm and a leg for
yeah,
everybody, like maybe like $1,000 per recruit, which
yeah,
is insane.
exactly. You were either doing like these, very expensive services, which we didn't even really understand at the time. Like we started basically going after like, look, like Pinterest, yeah, Uber, these like big companies, super innovative companies. They were like doing whatever they could, including posting on Craigslist. So we said the bar is pretty low. So I think we pretty quickly were like, we can beat that bar, or at least we can make that faster. And then, you kind of have these flywheels that just get better and better over time. So
When did you feel like you transitioned from, because I think most people know user interviews as like, a substantial player in the space. Many people, I've been a customer. A lot of people have used the service or whatever it is. At what point do you feel like you transitioned from the scrappy, you know, back of the napkin, let's figure out how to get ABC into this study, whatever it is, to like, now we're building like an engine. Now we're a professional company, I'll say in air quotes or something like that.
yeah, it's a hard question to answer. I don't feel like there's like one line where you kind of step over it. And I think one of the things that's allowed us to be good is we've always felt like there needs to be a human element, not just the participants, but on our team too. And I think like one of our kind of differentiators has always been we have this operations team, we have these project coordinators there. They're kind of, we're not pure software, right? Like you're getting human beings into a session, and we use data and we use tech to automate it and make it better. But we've always kind of had this operations aspect on the back. And um, so it's really been more of like less of like, okay, we've like crossed the Rubicon, and more just like, okay, we're going to continuously get more efficient over time. Some things that first made me feel like, oh, this is like getting to some level of success was I remember the first time like I just met, someone randomly who had heard of us. Like it was my roommate's girlfriend, like her classmate, she was in a PhD program, like was over, and she was like, oh, user interviews. I've done a project there. And I was like, no way. Like she's clearly wrong. And I remember I went up and like looked at our database, and I was like, oh yeah, she's right there. So I like specifically remember like a few moments like that when I was like, oh, people have heard of us. That was pretty cool.
That must be such a surreal experience because, like, especially in the early days, you're really toiling away in obscurity, right?
Yeah.
And I have some interesting moments from the first time I tried to do something where, putting in a lot of time and a lot of effort. At the time, I was like delivering food to make money on my bike.
Yeah.
And like, you really start to ask yourself if this is a good idea and what you're doing is a good idea and whatnot. And then you get like a little moment or like that or something where it's like we exist. People know we exist. People know we're a thing. We are a thing.
Yeah.
How often is that the moment in time where you started getting more and more of those?
Yeah. You kind of get more of those. I think one thing that was always in our favor for that is we always were able to get like pretty well known companies and pretty innovative companies like using us. So that was always something that I'd be like, whoa, this is like, Spotify is using us. Like, that's wild. Like, we're just kind of like three of us are working somewhere and we're like helping them like build products that, hundreds of millions of people are going to use, or I don't know how many, but millions of people are going to use. So I kind of always, I feel like that was something I would like when I was kind of toiling away in obscurity. I was kind of like, oh, it's pretty cool that like this company knows about us and is using us. And then, yeah, like those moments when you just kind of, I remember when we were like pitching our first investors and like one of them was like, oh yeah, one of my portfolio companies mentioned that they use you. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. So you kind of just like notice this buzz. And building a company is hard. Like you just like, you feel like you're just getting punched in the face over and over. So you kind of got to latch on to those like positive moments as much as you can.
Yeah. I hear, do you ever talk with people that are like founders at that earlier stage and you hear those sorts of things and you ask them like, and they ask you for like advice on getting past that moment? Like, what do you say to them?
Yeah. I mean, what I actually think I hear more with founders of the earlier stages, like they, I think we had trouble like fundraising, right? Like, and it wasn't like a sexy space, right? So I often talk to founders that are like in, kind of hot markets or like just get out of
Right.
YC, and I'm just like, it's gonna get tough. Like they just feel like oh, we're gonna do this like 10-step plan. We're gonna do this, and I'm like, I love the vision, but like,
Yeah, I love that you got the man. I feel like if you've had that kind of a starting point, it's probably not setting yourself up well in terms of expectations for how the rest of the journey is going to go, right?
yeah,
Like
at some
if
point
you
you're gonna
grinded
get.
those first few years out like you did, like you know what you're getting yourself into for year 4 and 5. Maybe not so much if you did the whole accelerator thing and raised millions of dollars off the bat. Like maybe the first money is maybe easy for you, but the
At some
second
point
time
that like
around,
raises your expectations, right? So
yeah.
it's like the goal you kind of have to
It
hit.
is
But
always funny to me where like I feel like not a lot of people do the back of the napkin math on like what the future revenue has to be to justify yesterday's valuation.
yeah,
Like that seems a little silly to me.
yeah. I mean, we've always raised it, and we have raised a lot of money, and I always feel like it was like fair valuations where as we went forward, our investors are in the money. And that kind of iterative process, I think, causes a lot of alignment. And I've always had like really good relationships with our investors and our board. I think that's part of it. But, I should be, honest. It's not like someone was offering me like 100x multiple and I said no to it, right? It was like, that's just kind of the world I ended up in. So,
Yeah.
I'm happy about it now, but definitely probably would have taken what was on the table at the time.
What's the relationship like for you? Right. Obviously, as the organization's grown, or really more as the revenue has grown and the product scope has grown, and you're doing more, you get a little bit more disconnected from like all of the nitty gritty details and all the little tasks that you probably used to do yourself, right? And now the world that you inhabit on a day-to-day basis changes. You're maybe probably spending more time talking to board members and your executive team and whatnot. Is there a way that you try and stay closer like to what's going on the ground? Like any techniques or approaches that you've found helpful?
Yeah, I think it's important too. I mean, like I still will like occasionally manage a project or occasionally, still do a good amount of sales or like talk to customers all the time or use the product to do user research. And I think it's important to stay there. And I think like that's something with my leadership team. I'm always kind of like pushing them like, hey, like you have to know like the nitty gritty of what they're doing because like how else can you like lead? And I think sometimes that leads you like sometimes I probably overdo it, right? I think I just naturally have that inclination, but I think a lot of people underdo it, and I think it's better to overdo it, and just kind of make sure you have that like real understanding of what's happening on the ground as much as possible.
There's I'm sure you're familiar with Rippling,
Hmm.
but they have the founders talked about this, and I've also talked to the person who leads research there about this too. But they have this concept of like going to ground. Like whenever something's happening that's unexpected, they don't like, it's like getting into every single detail around whatever it was that just surfaced it, from the IC who's working on it all the way up to the leader whose
Hmm.
team is responsible for it, and like actually looking at the logs, the error messages, talking to the customer, talking to the user, which
Hmm.
probably is a good general rule, I would say.
Yeah.
Um, based on that stuff. Do you find that do you ever get pushback on getting that involved in the nitty gritty from like other leaders on the team? Is that something that comes more naturally to you, or is it
No, I
also
mean, like, I
been?
think there's like a way to do it that's like empathetic, right? Like, I think there's things that I've learned as a company got bigger, like, oh, just because of my title, if I'm going in and like slacking someone who, there's a couple levels of management in between, like, it causes stress in a way that I don't intend it to, right? So maybe I'll go to if I look in, I'll tell the feedback to the leader and, then let it like bubble down, or, I'll make sure to do it in a positive. So there's things like that. I think that it's like important to do because you also don't want to like have you don't want people to like feel anxious or micromanaged either, right? Like you want to make sure there's like a positive environment when you do it. But I want to say that I haven't gotten pushback. I think there's ways to do it better.
When you've seen and you've looked at, because not only has the product company grown and changed and whatnot, but the field has changed like a lot
Hmm.
since 2018, let's say.
Yeah.
I mean, it's obviously so much bigger.
Hmm.
In some ways, I feel like it's a little bit more ossified, not necessarily in a good way. Like parts of the practice got kind of written into stone and
Hmm.
whatnot. What are some of the bigger observations you've had just watching things change over the last like half a decade to a decade?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's kind of like think there's a narrative that I've kind of like that I've seen on like how it's grown. I don't know if this is like fully directly answering your question, but like I think back in 2018 I'm pretty sure there were like talks about being the only researcher on your team, or being the first researcher building up the practice from scratch. And I think that's what a lot of the questions were, right? Like, hey, this is the first time to have research, like what do you need to do, like how do you set up the bones for it, how do you show value to the rest of the company, right? Like how do you show that you're valuable? And I think that's still obviously a big problem for a lot of researchers, but I think the next stage is we started seeing like bigger research teams, and then there was kind of like this big push towards democratization. And I think kind of, maybe 2 years ago, there was the response to that in a lot of ways. I think research operations was in a lot of ways a response to that, right? Where it was like, okay, more people are doing research, but is it being done at high quality? Are we doing it in a compliant way? Like, does the budget make sense? Who owns the budget? And I think research operations has kind of been um, the newest kind of way, like org change that we've seen. And then kind of like the market crash, right? So then it kind of like from then on, it feels like then it became a lot more like, okay, people are getting laid off. How do we like, it became, I think, a little bit more political within a lot of orgs because, there was just like much more higher scrutiny in budgets than there used to be. So that's kind of how I've seen like the orgs change over the past 8 years. I don't know. Does that line up with what you've seen?
Yeah, I think broadly, it's funny because the democratization stuff, like, there's so much negativity around the conversation for that,
Hmm.
which like, I think it was a big mistake that people were making moralistic arguments around whether democratization is like right or wrong, rather than if you take this approach, you get these benefits and it comes with these consequences, right? If you take the other approach, it comes with a different set of benefits and it comes with a different set of consequences.
Hmm.
And I think that has made it really hard to have a really thoughtful and balanced discussion about it, because I think it was never right for everyone or wrong for everyone, right?
Hmm.
But now with like this AI stuff, right? I think the whole conversation is moot because, you know, whatever the skill level is of a PM or a designer at doing usability tests or doing an interview, very soon, I've seen some demos that indicate it might already be here now. That work can be done just as well by an agent, right? If you're doing a base level usability test. So instead of having a thoughtful conversation about when this stuff is appropriate and when it's not, we never had that. In my opinion, we never really had that conversation about what the appropriate time is. And now we're like at a point where now we have these AI agents and whatnot who are going to be doing this stuff. And instead of knowing when and how to use it, we're still like, should we democratize or not? Should we let other people do research or not? Even though they're going to do it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. It felt like it was like, you're not going to put the genie back in the bottle. So like how many, like, is it worth having like reps here? Or is it worth like, okay, given that this is happening, like, how do we make it be done? How do we allow it to be done in the best possible way is how I've always thought about it. Right. Like I don't, but yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it is like,
Also, I feel like part of it is it's false.
Really
part of the conversation is false. Yeah. Because like you can't control what other people do, right? Yeah. Like you can influence it, right? If they've decided they're going to do these interviews and usability tests on their own because you don't have time and they just want to do it, what are you going to do? Go to their boss and tell them that they have to fire them? Like that's not realistic. So like we never really had the choice to say you're not going to do it or you are going to do it. It's really always been in their hands anyway.
Yeah, and from my position as someone who is a vendor, right, to people doing research, I think it actually probably on net is good, on balance is good. Like I'm not against it, but the thing is, I didn't even feel like I needed to think too hard about it. From like I just knew that it was happening, and I can make research better. Right? I can make sure that they have high quality participants when they can do it. I make sure they do it compliant. I can make sure like you're not talking to the same person too often across the company. Right? Like we can build in these things. It just makes it a better experience, and let I think it's good that different companies try different things. That's how we move forward, right? Like it's not like we have one way and that's just like what we do, right? Like different companies try different things. They have different levels of success and then cross pollinates and like presumably the best bubbles up over time.
I feel like that's probably a healthy approach, and you just get to say like, this is a matter of fact. So let's just make it, whatever it is, let's make it better. Did the types of conversations and the comments that you would see on like LinkedIn all the time, did that ever influence your points of view on this stuff? Because every time I read that, I'm just like some of these fights, in the comment section, I'm like, man,
not really.
Do we have to?
Actually, I actually like until okay, so on democratization itself, which I don't know how much time I need to spend here. I actually when I initially heard about it, I was just like, oh, this is great, all positive. Then I was like, oh, some people LinkedIn let me know that there were like negative takes on it, and I think there's some accuracy to those takes, but so LinkedIn just let me know there was even like an issue there. But yeah, I didn't I don't over-index on that by any means.
Yeah,
what about you?
It's hard not to just want to tune it out, to be honest. I think so also. A big part of what I do is I'm just having conversations with people all the time, right? And these are almost always private conversations. And obviously there's nobody listening in, so I get to hear candid feelings and what's happening, and none of it's on the record. So I can talk about what's happening on a team, what's happening with conflict and this and that or whatever. And I just always get frustrated by the fact that there's such a disconnect between what I see people do who are managing their teams, the way they feel about it and what they're doing in it. Because when you're managing a team, you also are interacting so much with other kind of like leaders in the organization, and you get a sense of the trade-offs. Mm-hmm. And that's something that a lot of ICs don't get exposed to, right? And it's not really just it's really not about like cost, really. Mm-hmm. It's about like output, and it's about how you negotiate, how we work together. It's about how you negotiate priorities and whatever it is. And that's something that you just don't get exposed to. And when you realize that it's the whole conversation around democratization it's not like a silo thing that's just for researchers to talk about and figure out. That actually is something that we have to negotiate with everybody that we work with around it. Mm-hmm. And that was like a perspective that I heard a lot. And so it was frustrating to see like such a narrow point of view, and then that a lot of people would see that and not even get exposed to like the counter side of it, because it's not worth people's times to get flamed in the comments because you think that,
Yeah.
it's
Like
worth having other
if you
people
have
do it.
like
Yeah,
if
like
you have a real job, it's hard to spend all
yeah,
day
exactly.
like arguing back and forth, right? So
I think that's one of the worst consequences of, I don't know if LinkedIn is social media, but I think for all intents and purposes, it's like where a
I
lot
think
of
it counts.
people go to see that what the conversation is. I think that's like one of the worst consequences of it, is that a lot of the posts and the comments end up being a reflection of a really loud and small minority of any group of people, really.
Yeah, for sure. Um, but yeah, I mean, to your point, it's like now the new discussions around AI, and I think it's fun to see how that's evolving. I think that's like really interesting. I think there's going to be some real misses, and I think there's going to be some real hits, and that the effect that has on the industry. I think it's still evolving right now, and we
I
don't
mean,
sort of.
it must be nice for you guys to be like building essentially shovels and pickaxes in the era of of AI, because I think you can definitely see how the volume of conversations is going to increase by like two orders of magnitude in the next
Mhm.
10 years. Like
Yeah,
that's
I
totally
think
plausible.
yeah, for sure. I mean, like, and I'm probably the most biased person in the world, so but I still feel very strongly that no matter how much AI is part of this, like there still needs to be like real users on the other side, and that's so. So we should be a beneficiary, right? Like we should assume if more research is happening, therefore more users are being talked to, and user interviews is the best way to find those users.
I have seen one product that has like synthetic users
Yeah.
specifically for surveys, and they I know one of the people behind it, and they're credible humans,
Hmm.
and they claim that for specific use cases it can work. I'm
Hmm.
extremely skeptical on the actual like interviews, and maybe usability tests would work. I'm less confident about that, but like concept tests, interviews, I think it's going to be really hard to replace people because we're
Yeah, I
just
think that as
changing
well.
so
That's also my
much.
take. Like I should, but I think we're monitoring, right? And that seems to be the take from the industry as well. But to your point, like I think, uh, my kind of framework for AI, and I wrote a blog post on this, is like, you have people building like kind of those standard AI features, which I think are, type aheads, auto summaries. I think those are all good, but not like stepwise functions. You then have the AI moderation tools that you were mentioning earlier. Those are getting positive feedback, but none of them have really taken off yet, right? Those are still kind of in the early stages, but it seems like there's some level of optimism around them. You then have like the insight layer, and that seems to be like you should really be thinking AI first principles for the insights, right? You have like this massive amount of qualitative data. You need to summarize it, make it easy to, and I think that's what the companies there, Marvin or Dovetail, et cetera, they are like investing a ton in AI because of that. And then you have our layer of the stack, right? The participant layer. And what we're doing is using AI to power the recruitment, right? To power the matching algorithm, to power the fraud detection. So it's all on the back end. That should just make the product better. But then you also do have what you were mentioning just now, which is like these synthetic users. And, you know, I think I've been a little dismissive of them, but, maybe I shouldn't be. Like, maybe that'll be a mistake. And I think like it does seem, everyone kind of, from what I understand, the people behind it, I haven't met them, are smart people. They're thinking very thoughtfully about it. And um, there may be slices where it makes sense. But I still think the bulk will need real users. And at the end of the day, but it's definitely worth monitoring. And we've been surprised by the world's been surprised by technological changes before, so I should probably be a little
Yeah,
bit dismissive of.
I was also extremely dismissive off the bat.
Yeah,
I am still highly skeptical of the interview stuff,
yeah,
and,
that's my
and I
take.
have not done any been able to do any like tests of this survey stuff,
Yeah,
though they seem pretty confident. But it is a bit of a confidence game at the early stage.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a little scary in the sense that, like, if you think of like computing a problem, right? Like you just couldn't do it, right? Like if it's like if a computer can't do it, it can't do it, and right? You know what a computer can do, what a computer can't do. With AI, like it's gonna spit out a response. And that response just might be wrong, but I think that's like much harder to differentiate, right? So you could imagine that if you think it's going to have less high quality, it's still pushing out something, and then people, there's kind of like a long cycle before you realize that it might not work. Maybe.
Yeah,
But
it's funny you say that, because like one of the things that I've often mentioned and reflect on with people is like, it's impossible to tell if research is good or bad by the report or the output alone. You can't do it unless you actually know the full context of the project, right? The full
yeah.
context of how was the recruit done?
Mhm.
How did you design the study guide or the discussion guide? How did you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? You can't actually tell, because like bad research or false research is indistinguishable, right, from correct stuff.
Yeah, until
Unless,
you implement it, or if you can
and then
figure it
something's
out.
not working, right? Which is a really big problem.
Yeah.
So like, I think one of the things that I really misunderstood early on when I was like an IC researcher was, it's not like if you are a bad designer, first of all, it's going to be pretty obvious, probably pretty quickly, because like
Mhm.
what you're mocking up just doesn't make a lot of sense, or it looks ugly or whatever. But also it's very quick to tell, like all of a sudden you'll have big drop-offs in certain feature usage or activation rates or retention or whatever it is. With research, that's not really the case, right? Like you can become essentially an agent of chaos in a company by, to use a term that's usually relates to like politics, was like or media, which is like misinformation. It's like it's stuff that's not true that looks true, that looks like it has evidence behind it. And again, you can't tell unless you actually dig into the material, which is a unique downside to investing in research in a way, right?
Yeah.
Is that you
And
actually
I
can
think
do far more
the
damage.
analogy to this is this happens with data too, and analytics, where sometimes like I actually think in a lot of ways research is analogous to the analytics and data teams. But yeah, same idea where like, if someone has bad data, or they're like, it's really easy to spit out a report that tells you this exciting thing. And then like sometimes like someone either has to have like good intuition to say like, no, I need to like dig in on that, because that doesn't like fit in with everything else we know, right? You have your priors before it, but yeah, I think like that happens on the data side, and it can happen on the research side as well, which is it's unique. I agree, it's like a unique problem for these spaces.
How are you thinking? Like, obviously, a big part of your job is you have to anticipate what's coming next. Like, how are you thinking about, what research looks like 3, 4, 5 years out?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is just being in the market, right? Like talking to researchers, talking to the other tools, and I think it's um, less about like predicting what's happening 5 years out, but more about like moving fast with what's happening now, right? Like the seeds of anything that's happening 5 years out, there's something happening now, or anything that's happening 3 years, there's something happening now. So it's like, and I think part of that is like kind of these AI moderation tools, for instance, like we are building partnerships and relationships with them um, at this point, right? Even though they're like quite small. So for us, that's more how we think about it. Like it's you look at what's small now, or what's new now, or where there's energy now, and then you try to like
Be
pull that
fast to
thread and
respond.
see what makes sense for you.
Yeah, that's cool. Um, you're a dad now, right? It's been a
Yeah.
few years since you started user interviews. Um, as you think about other people starting out, maybe in the same situation
Mhm.
that you were in years ago, are there any things that you kind of like wish you knew, or like the advice you would give to your younger self when you were starting out that comes to mind, as life has changed a little bit?
Yeah. Specifically about starting a company.
Starting, but also like, I think it's very easy for this stuff to feel like it's totally all encompassing, right? And like your
Mhm.
entire identity is wrapped up in this stuff. Um, but there's more to our human experience than just, our weekly growth rates.
Oh, is there? I don't think so.
Well,
I think that's
maybe
it.
the investors think otherwise, or
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I do think that like I do think that like starting a company that is kind of like, especially on like the venture path where it's like, there's pressure to grow fast. Um, Look, unless you like got lightning in a bottle with Twitter or something like that, like it's gonna it's gonna be more than a regular job. Like it is gonna be all encompassing to some extent. Like you are gonna be thinking about it. You're gonna be like sending emails while you're hanging out with your friends. I think that's just you don't want that for your whole team, but I think as a founder, you should be ready for that, right? And it is gonna be like I think it is going to be a lot more stressful days over time, right? And then you have these really high highs, but um, you do need to think of it as like much more of a marathon than a sprint, and it is going to be all encompassing. But then, yeah, I think like you have to have things outside of it that bring you joy, or that you can like turn your brain off and focus on that, whether that's family or friends or exercise.
What was that for you in the early days?
In the early days, it was just like friends, family, like socializing in a lot of ways, and then like some level of physical activity has always been good.
That's a good important stuff.
Yeah. Used to play more, like I guess like pick up basketball. Now I just get injured every time I do that, so I stopped.
It's been like 6 months since I picked up a basketball, and like I still have ball dreams. I'm
one of these days
30. I'm 30 right now, so I have how many more years before I'm ineligible for the draft? So embarrassing to say that out loud, but it's true.
Keep following the dreams.
Yeah,
but I do think it's important. Like if you're going to found a company, especially like I said on the venture path, that you know what you're jumping into, right? Like you're not like it's not just going to be. It's not going to be easy, right? There's going to be a lot of like tough decisions and stressful things. Yeah, there's a really good book called like The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz from Andreessen Horowitz, and like what he says is like he's like everyone thinks like the hard thing is like coming up with the right strategic idea or like having like this like great pitch or something, but like the hard thing is that like what the right thing is, but doing the right thing sucks, or doing the right thing is still like, takes like 20 hours, it's like, it's not like these like moments of brilliance.
I couldn't agree more, man. It's been amazing knowing you all these years and seeing all the growth. And I know, while it might look all shiny and nice and like a clear line up from the outside, I'm sure it didn't feel that way on the inside. But it's great to see all that, and I'm excited to be still hanging out and partnering up on things. And thanks for sharing all your wisdom on what it's been like for you as you started out.
One thing I should say is, I think all of that grinding and that work and that stuff times is what makes the good times more rewarding, right? And what makes you feel like brings you the joy and builds the relationships with the team and with the partners and stuff. Like I think if the amount of effort you put into it like makes you feel more, brings you more joy on the other side as well. So that there is upside here, which is good as well. But
I love to hear it. You must be having lots of joy these days, because you put in a lot of hours.
The baby is the baby's all joy. That's great.
That's awesome. Cool. Well, thanks for joining me, man. We'll catch you. I'd love to have you back as we see some new developments in the research space. Get your thoughts on those with some of our other friends who are running stuff in the space.
Awesome. I'm super pumped for learners in 2025.
Me too. Thanks, man. Talk to you soon.
Have a good.